As natural wood species go, redwood is in a class of its own. A sustainable alternative to tropical hardwoods, redwood is grown and harvested to the highest environmental standards in the world. Named for the dark red heartwood at the center of the tree, redwood imparts natural beauty, warmth, and durability to interior and exterior building applications, including decking, fencing, paneling, siding, exposed beams and timbers, pergolas, and other shade structures. To learn more about redwood from Humboldt Sawmill, please visit getredwood.com.
If you have no combustion appliances in your house, have you completely eliminated the concern of carbon monoxide? Are there any other sources? Maybe a car running in an attached garage, but I don't know if I can think of any other source.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding, Contributing Editor, and Production Manager for TDS Custom Construction, Ian Schwant.
Hello, everyone.
Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor Brian Pontalillo.
Hey, everyone.
And producer Andres Samaniego. Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Great to see you guys this morning. Thanks a million for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Ian, it's been a while since you've been on the show. What have you been doing?
Been hard at work. We had our first big company one full day meeting where we went over previous year financials, and everybody on the leadership team, all four of us, gave a presentation about things that we do. So I actually gave a presentation on how we develop prices and budgets for projects, which we'll talk about in the after show, but it's less about how you do takeoffs and come up with your cost of goods and more about how to approach it. So I got some really good feedback from the team after giving them that run through. And otherwise, our new home build, we just entered the finish phase of it, and crew's doing great on that project, and we'll talk a little bit about how that's coming in financially as part of that after show pricing talk. But
just to interrupt you 1 second, we can remind listeners this is the home you recently had an open house for your company to show your work, right?
Correct. Yep, we had that open house back in, I believe, early December, and we accelerated the schedule pretty quick on that. So I'm happy at how that whole project's coming together. And right before the show, I sent you guys a photo of the miles per gallon that I'm getting on my Ford Maverick that I'm 2 months and 5,000 miles into driving. And I'm pretty happy with the overall average on it.
How is it as a vehicle? Is it comfortable? Is it reliable? Is it have good air conditioning? What can you tell
Well, it has good heat because, it's December and January that I've been driving it, so I haven't quite tested the air out yet. I find it very similar to the 2004 Ford Ranger that I had. It's a good highway vehicle, good driving in town in Madison. It's easy for me to park. Through a little bit of research I did on some owner forum pages, I did find that it's essentially just a Ford Escape with a truck body on it. So that was kind of interesting to find out. Filled in some blanks in my, how did they design this thing so much like a car? Well, they just took a car and made it a truck. So,
but is it good in the snow? Is it all-wheel drive? Because that would be a concern.
So the one that I have is front wheel drive, and that's the only spec that they sell the hybrid in right now. And I think that has to do with how the hybrid drivetrain that Ford has works, that it doesn't quite work with the all-wheel drive, but you can get an all-wheel drive version, but then it's a 20 mile per gallon vehicle, and that just wasn't going to work for my 110 mile drive round trip for work that I do. But otherwise, I bought a little rack for it, which I'll send you pictures of. That works out for hauling a little bit of material. So it does everything I need it to do. as far as a truck.
It's timely because we heard from, I think it was 4 or 5 podcast listeners on the subject of electric work trucks, and we'll hear from another Ian later in the show who had some thoughts on the subject. Brian, what have you been up to?
Well, before I say what I've been up to, I just want to let everyone know that this house that Ian has talked very much about on the podcast for a while now, we're going to publish it in the magazine, which is exciting. We have, um, as Ian mentioned, it's coming into a finish phase now, so hopefully it won't be too long. When the spring rolls around and the trees have leaves on them and whatnot, we can get some nice photos. And I just Ian had talked about this house, and I had a chance to sit down and learn about it from their architect. And at every corner, this house has great things to learn. Which is, I mean, quite literally, because some of the corners are at odd angles for good reasons. So, yeah, I love this project, and I really can't wait to get it in the magazine. I think it's going to be a really dynamite article. So I wanted to share that just as a little bit of a tease. I think I mentioned on the last after show that I've just been steeped in the world of indoor air quality for about 2 weeks now, helping Monica Rokiki from Better Building Works prepare for the class that she's going to teach for Fine Homebuilding. About 6 hour, 6 module e-learning class on providing healthier indoor air quality. I'll share one cool thing that's been on my mind a lot that she sort of made really clear in her presentations and will in this class is how over the lifespan of houses, things are changing all the time. And so there's no one solution to indoor air quality. You build the house right, and now all of a sudden you have healthy indoor air quality for the life of the house. That it's something that needs to be considered. She calls it time stamping. And looking at the house at different critical junctures, but really that's to say that this is something that needs to be paid attention to and monitored to the best we can, all along in a house. So she's kind of helped me really understand the importance of indoor air quality, from the dramatic effects of carbon monoxide to the subtler effects of carbon dioxide, right? So that's sort of what I've been up to for about 2 weeks, just really immersed in that. And coincidentally, I'm going to write an article for the magazine about it, partially based on what I've been learning working with Monica. So some of what's going to be in her class will be in this article, and then some other interviews that I have lined up with experts in certain aspects of indoor air quality. So yeah,
I,
that's coming.
I think that's the perfect opportunity to ask our podcast listeners if they have questions regarding indoor air quality to send on the podcast, and maybe those are some of the things you could address in your feature.
Yeah, I think I was saying to you, Patrick, that it's one of those things that on the more subtle levels that we don't know. It's something we don't know that can be better until we experience it better, because we're so used to living in our houses the way that they are. If we've never looked into the indoor air quality in our house, we might not know that it could be better, and could have, and that improved indoor air quality could have an effect on how we're feeling.
Maybe that's my
It's
problem,
interesting
Brian.
that you it's interesting that you bring that up, Brian, because during the polar vortex weather that we had uh, in early January in Wisconsin, when we had some minus 20 and minus 30-degree temps, uh, my house was getting smacked with a really tough 30-mile-per-hour wind from the northeast, which is really uncommon for where I live. It's not uncommon for us to get hit with a straight east wind or a straight north wind, but the combination of the two is really uncommon. And our carbon monoxide detector actually went off one night after we had our vented gas stove going, and we realized that the outlet for that was actually getting hit straight on by the wind in such a way that it was pushing the flue gases back into the house or not letting them come out. So it was kind of an interesting experience for us to go through of like, why is this suddenly a problem?
Yeah, that is interesting, and that's one of the things that I know is going to be part of this of Monica's course. She talks a bit about the um, weather conditions and just sort of air quality conditions in general around the house. So like looking at what's happening outside is important to understanding what's going to be happening inside.
Yeah.
I'm left speechless about your situation with the gas fireplace, and maybe that's a good reason not to put combustion appliances in because they might be working fine most of the time, but all it takes is one weird event, and the thing is backdrafting.
Yeah, and especially if you're like me at different times in my life, and you get sick of the chirping detector, and you just smash it with a broom and knock it off the ceiling because it's bothering you while you're trying to watch the Packers or the Pittsburgh Steelers play.
My experience is it always happens in the middle of the night, which I cannot explain, and then you're trying to figure out which of the devices is the one that's going off. Yeah.
So here's a question I don't know the answer to. When if you have if you have no combustion appliances in your house, have you completely eliminated the concern of carbon monoxide? Are there any other sources? I mean, maybe a car running in an attached garage, but I don't know if I can think of any other source of carbon monoxide in a house other than combustion appliances.
I suspect you're right on that,
Yeah.
but I think the code would still push you to have the detector on each floor, just as part of, you never know if somebody would put a gas stove in or switch to
Yeah.
a gas appliance, that you wouldn't want to do that without the CO detector.
People do weird stuff in power outages too. They start,
Right.
heating the house with the gas range. They start cooking with the grill inside, or putting it in the garage
Yep.
or in the breezeway or whatever. So yeah.
You see what happened there is that I mentioned Monica's thing about time stamping and how houses change over the time. I forgot it and asked that question. You guys remembered it, and your response was, "Yeah, because things are going to change in the house."
Mm.
Yep. You set us up, Ryan.
Andres, what have you been doing? You've been hard at work, as I understand it, doing fine home building production.
Yeah, we've been working on a few articles and videos for editorial purposes, as well as sponsor stuff with Versatex PVC trim, exterior trim. But right now, I'm actually upgrading my main bathroom. So I'm changing the vanity, and I had to replace one of the uh, nipple fittings that was sticking out a little bit too much. I ended up going with a 2 inch just because of the type of cabinet vanity that I'm installing. However, I ran into some issues, and the pipes are kind of old, and the fitting broke on me. So I'm actually replacing the entire line that runs all the way down to the basement with possibly a PEX. So that's my project for later on today.
Oh man, I can't wait to hear how that turns out. So, my experience with plumbing is there's about a 50% chance of it going sideways anytime I touch it. So,
Yeah, it was a pretty old, feeding, and when I tried to, tighten up the nipple feeding, it kind of broke off. So when I turned on the water,
was it brass? Because brass
it
breaks
was brass
easy.
to copper, and it was, I think
Yeah.
it's three quarters of the pipe. It's three quarters. Then I don't think they no longer sell that in the back store. I only found a half an inch.
A good hardware store might have more selection. Have you tried to cut out the piece of pipe that snapped off in there, or are you just gonna?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did. I tried to solder, but it's so old, and the feeding is actually, it kind of like they tighten it so it fits, and then they solder around it. So I think that's why that's why it broke.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my project for today. I'm actually gonna upgrade it to PEX because I have access.
Cool. Well, keep us posted and take a picture because I'm sure listeners are
Definitely.
curious. They're
And
going to live
count your trips.
vicariously through your plumbing mishaps, I'm sure.
Count your trips to the hardware store too, because that was how I always determined the success of my plumbing projects when I
Yeah.
was remodeling our house in New
So far
York.
it's been one trip because I thought I was gonna be able to solder,
It's good.
but I'm gonna replace the whole
If
I've
you, if
kit.
you
learned the
can
hard
keep it
way
under
is
five.
I've learned the hard way is to just buy everything you think you could possibly need and then return it. It's yeah, because you'll end up going back to get whatever it was you didn't get.
Right.
I've been doing a little landscape lighting, and forgive me if I've mentioned that on the podcast before. I know I told some of my coworkers, but I'll put a photo of that on the podcast page. And I got to say to you all out there who have corner lights and weird lights that you're using to light up your pathways, consider some low voltage or line voltage landscape lighting. It makes your life so much nicer. It's not pollution for the neighbors, and frankly, it looks great. So I'll put some a picture of that, what I've been working on, in the podcast page if you're curious. The transformer I have has perhaps the best user interface of any electronic device I've ever used. You turn it on with one button, and you adjust the amount of time it stays on after dusk. So if you push the button up, it will register 1 hour increments up to, I think, 9 or 10 hours, and down lowers the amount of time it's on. Super easy. Love that. No learning curve in how to program it. Just pretty great life changing thing. Do you guys have landscape or low voltage lighting or some way to illuminate your pathways? Yeah. What do you got, Andres?
So when I did the exterior kitchen remodel, I also did a paver patio. So I was able to dig up a trench in there, and I ran electricity from my house to the exterior to a box converter to 12 volt low voltage lighting that I put kind of like a pathway, and then I filled that with gravel and set some limestone on top, so it kind of looks, lights up in the night.
Cool.
I'll send some photos in.
Neat. Yeah, it's a really cool upgrade. I would recommend anyone spend a few $100 and make your life better
Yeah.
that way. This comes from Andre regarding our 614 after show. Good evening, gents. I found your podcast after show discussion relevant and engaging. I wanted to share my 2 cents with you as a handyman business owner for the last 2.5 years. To be fair, I've been working by myself for only about 2 years, and only in the last half year started growing the team. I have a background in software and tech, so it's been relatively easy for me to promote myself online and bring in business. On the other hand, because I'm pretty new to construction, I've had to learn everything on my own, so I've struggled with being able to take on more complex jobs. As far as I can tell, there is definitely a business opportunity for handyman services. We're based in San Diego, California, and everywhere I go, people ask for my business cards. The potential customer base is much larger than just homeowners, by the way. We've worked for property managers, realtors, commercial maintenance people, contractors too, with great success. What you mentioned about the retainer/subscription-based handyman model during the podcast really got the gears turning. A year or so ago, I hired someone to do cold calls and to all kinds of real estate professionals in San Diego. We received a great response. A property manager wanted us to do many large projects, but we had to turn them down because we didn't have a general contractor's license. Additionally, other property managers wanted a bunch of small work done here and there, but our price and minimum charge were too high for them. There's another reason I believe there's a business here, and that's and also that that might be where the monthly service model might work. The last thing I should touch on is that arguably the most challenging thing to do has been finding qualified help. There's a lot that goes into being a great handyman. They obviously need a broad skill set in the trades. Moreover, they need to be great with clients. Usually handyman gets sent to the jobs by themselves, so they're always client facing. And they also need to be technologically competent. If you want to scale a business, each handyman needs to know how to clock in, clock out for jobs on their phone, upload before and after pictures, search for job material on their phone, and communicate with their dispatcher. I've interviewed countless handyman applicants and so far have only found 3 or 4 that check all the boxes. I'm stoked to continue my handyman business journey. It's my first time hiring people, and I'm seeing just how important my role is to the people around me. Thank you for putting together a great episode, and I will certainly be tuning in for more. Best regards, Andre, owner, Andre Handyman, and I'll put a link on the podcast page to Andre's business. Thanks, Andre. What do you guys think?
Well, I think he brings up. I think that's a very, interesting point. That unless you're maybe big enough to have specialized handymen and have the work to have a handy person that does the electrical stuff, or a handy person does carpentry stuff, or whatever the different sub skills might be. A handy person that does the drywall work. That would take a big company with lots of work to keep everyone employed and be specialized. So you do need to have employees. Everyone has to have that round skill set. I I like his last sentence about sort of his responsibility to the employees as a business owner. It does seem like an opportunity, to do some training, right? So you get people with as many of the skills as possible, and do what you can to train on the other skills. I don't know how, in a small business where the jobs are small dollar amounts, I don't know how affordable it is to train on the job. That's because that's one of the challenging things, right? I think I love the idea of building companies that have great programs for bringing in unskilled labor and training them. But there's a cost associated. And I mean, Ian probably knows, this better than I do, because he's involved more in the business of building. But there's a cost associated with training someone. To have someone on a job to give them training, you're paying them without getting lots of productivity out of them for the time of the training. Maybe it's a worthwhile investment in the company, but for a small business, you simply either have or don't have the money to make that investment often.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brian. And it's challenging to figure out how to price that into your work. You either have to price it into your gross profit needs, or you have to price it into the burden labor rate of your individual workers, which is it's the trade union model, where part of your wage that's paid by the contractor goes into a fund, which then operates the training center, but they're doing it at the scale of thousands of workers. So it's very different than what someone like Andre has to do.
Yeah.
I maintain that one of the biggest obligations of a contractor or any business owner is to provide work for their employees. And I think Andre touches on that there, is that, his job as a business owner is to bring enough work to keep these folks employed so they don't have to find other work and deal with the stress of that. So
it's something that I've discussed with several of my Remodelers Advantage peers, that it's challenging to think about the scope of decision making in a business. Oftentimes people in my role gravitate more toward the project management stuff and having a continued involvement in the day to day. But it's really important for someone in my role, or Andre's role, or any business owner, to be fully tuned into making those operational decisions that run the business. Because if you have a carpenter in the field who makes a bad decision, it might be $1,000 worth of lumber. If myself and my boss make a series of bad decisions, there's no work for anybody.
I don't, I haven't met a contractor who didn't take that seriously.
Yeah.
I would say one of the cooler things about the small nature of the home building business is there is ownership, literally, in those decisions. And when you are looking at the people every day, I'm sure you do not take them lightly.
Yep.
This comes from Michael, and interestingly, this showed up in my social media feed too. But it describes Michael, just sums it up here. We've all been here, haven't we? It describes NASA's efforts to free a pair of stuck fasteners on an asteroid canister, and I'll put a couple links on the podcast page that explains what happened. But this is my favorite part. This comes from CNN.com. To address the issue, NASA said 2 tools were created from surgical steel, the hardest metal approved for use in the pristine curation glove boxes. So what they had to do is make this surgical steel ratchet and a clamp that held it tight into the fastener so they could try and loosen it. And my immediate observation was that any good mechanic would tell you that stainless steel fasteners in a stainless steel box are likely to gall and get jammed up. So I think what they really needed was an impact driver. But, you can't put that in the pristine glove box. So if you are interested in that, I will put the links on the podcast page that explain it more. Did you guys hear about this?
I read your links. It's worth a read. It's good stuff.
This comes from Bob. Hey, podcast crew. During the podcast, you and the team raised two issues I wanted to address. First, the new generation of water leak detectors. One of the first things I installed after purchasing our house was a Flow by Moen, which provides whole house leak protection. It works great. If there's a drip or unusual water activity, my smartphone gets a notice, and if I don't override it, the water shuts off. Also, each month, I get an email letting me know about my prior month's water usage. I'm located in Bethel, Connecticut, only a few miles from your old office. If you'd like to stop by and take a look, you are welcome. Second, on moving heavy items, I'm enamored with the idea of an air sled. I don't have one, but I'm looking forward to the time when I have a project that will call for the purchase of one. Love the podcast and the after show, and agree with everyone that I wish Jeff the best in the future. Bob. Thanks, Bob. What do you guys think about the leak detection things? Is that something you've had to deal with your clients' projects, Ian?
We have one installed on that new house project, I believe, and I think it's that Moen Flow that Bob mentions in his letter.
Brian, have you weren't you working or considering a feature article on this for Fine Homebuilding?
Well, I wrote about them for GBA a number of years ago, and it was a surprisingly bigger category already at the time than I knew it was. There's actually like quite a many products that work in many different ways, and I wrote about it for GBA, and I was thinking that I'd like to bring that article over to Fine Homebuilding in terms of being sort of a product article, but also get some how-to from one of our plumbing authors on how to install one in an existing house, because I think it's like for a lot of our readers who tackle projects, I think it's something that a lot of people can do. So I'm hoping to get that in the magazine in the next year or so. I think they're a smart thing, and for the cost of them, they almost seem like a no-brainer now. Like, if you're doing some plumbing or building a new house, to just kind of put one in as a matter of course. And that's sort of my opinion. I talked to one plumber who felt the same way as me. Like, for a few $100s when I'm plumbing a new house, I tell the builder or the client that this is worthwhile protection to put in. But I've also talked to builders who said, even though it's only a few $100s, we build houses in basements, we put drains in the floors, for in most cases, it's a few $100s that we just don't need. So I've sort of heard both sides of that argument, but I think they're smart devices. Well, literally, some of them are smart devices that learn our habits. And there was one story that I heard while I was working on that article from someone who had one installed in their house and had learned their water usage habits. And their college-age daughter had come home from school late one night and got in the shower at like 1 a.m. and the water turned off on her. And so mid-shower, hair soaped up, the water stopped working because the smart device thought this must be a leak because they don't use their water at 1 a.m. in the morning. Sometimes the smart devices, well, I guess they have to make some assumptions. But yeah, I think they're an interesting product category that, I think I say this a lot, but I understand that as more and more solutions are invented for our homes, it's easy to say that things are cheap insurance, and it's easy for the line item of cheap insurance in our budget to get out of control. So everyone's got to make that decision for themselves, but they seem smart to me.
We got to get to questions, so I'll keep it brief, but it surprises me the insurance industry isn't pushing for these things more commonly, right? Because I'm sure the average water damage claim eclipses by a factor the few $100 you would spend on one of these to save the house in the event of a pipe rupture or some other weird thing that happened, right?
If I remember right. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Ian.
That's why we're installing one on this new house. It was actually something that the homeowner's insurance for our client was giving them enough of a credit for that it offset the cost. But all of these smart water and smart electric things conjure visions in my head of Mike Girton sitting at something that looks like the Starship Enterprise bridge with a big computer showing all the water and electrical usage from his real estate empire. I just had to throw that in there for Mike, make sure he's listening.
That's funny.
This is from another Ian on the subject of EV vehicles. Hey guys, first time listener. I was intrigued by the EV discussion. Perhaps I'm somewhat qualified because I work with both my wife's interior architecture and design studio and as a product designer on EV fleet management software. Ian sent a link to his company Standard Fleet, and I'll put a link on the podcast page that if you're interested in checking that out. But what it does is tracks the mileage and wear and tear on the vehicles, so you can keep them in working order. You're spot on about the pickups. 150 Lightning and Rivian R1T are EV pickup trucks, though this space is going to have a lot more stuff coming. Rivian's R2 series, the T-Low K-inspired mini truck. If you're curious what that is, the T-Low or Taylow, the manufacturer describes it as Tacoma capacity and the footprint of a Mini Cooper. And despite the fact it's pretty ugly, in my opinion, it seems like a pretty useful vehicle. Ian writes further on the delivery van side, there are a lot more models available. While I am now in Europe, almost every big OEM has an electric version of the delivery van. The main question is how good the range is. Sometimes the range is small as they're mostly meant for a lot of stop and go city deliveries, which means low mileage, speed, and range. Here's a list of models I found in the U.S. available and coming soon. The E-Transit from Ford, the E-Sprinter from Mercedes, the Ram ProMaster EV, the VW ID Buzz Cargo, Rivian's delivery vans that they originally developed for Amazon are now available to anyone to buy, and Rivian uses them as mobile service vehicles too. There are other startups like Canoe, BrightDrop, Arrival. Those are at various stages of development. Hope this helps, Ian. Well, thanks, Ian, for writing in. That was pretty cool. And you like your Ford Maverick hybrid, Ian?
Yeah, I'm really happy with it. I feel like it does all the truck stuff that I need it to do. Being an avid indoorsman, I am never going to be pulling a big camper around or putting a pop up on the back of it. So
Can you
I
carry
don't,
lumber
I
and
don't,
building materials, though? I mean, legitimately. You mentioned
I,
a roof
I
rack.
sent, I sent you photos of my rack, and I can get with the sliding rear window, 12 and 16-foot lumber in there uh, without any issue. So it works for me. At TDS, we're also looking into starting to replace our fleet, probably with the Ford E-Transits. One of our plumbers purchased one at the end of last year, so I'm using him as the test guinea pig to see if it works for driving around Madison with a loaded down van.
Andres, you have a big truck. Does this appeal to you at all? Would you ever consider an electric pickup truck?
Not an electric. I'm more of a hybrid type of person. I did own a Toyota Sienna 2020 when I had to work in Jersey because I had to travel every day for like 3 hours traffic sitting in there. So 3 hours and
Yeah.
3 hours would be like 6 hours in driving there. So I was pretty much driving for like 6 months straight. And I ended up replacing my previous truck, which was the same, to a hybrid. It was giving me about 40 miles a gallon, and it saved me a lot of money there. But the only reason why I changed back is the car was not an all-wheel drive. It was one of the first models of the transition from Sienna six-cylinder to a hybrid. So it was hard to find a on an all-wheel drive because this was in the middle of COVID, and everybody was buying cars, and there was no inventory. So I sold that car, and then I switched back to a truck because I needed to work in my house, and I needed to haul stuff, and that's why I kind of bought the new, not the new, but an old Toyota Tundra.
How about you, Brian? You have a Ranger from 2000 something, right?
98. 98. I got a Ranger with a tape deck. I got tapes and I love it. Um, and I hope that I don't have to think about whether I want a gas hybrid or electric vehicle for a while, because I would like to just keep this vehicle going for a bit. I don't know if the data backs this up, but I'm still kind of the mind that if you're the thing that you have is probably a better bet for our climate issues than the new thing. Almost, maybe no matter what that is. I'm sure that's way too generalized to be accurate, but I think you understand what I'm saying. I would definitely, right now with my lifestyle, working at home and mostly doing around town driving, I would definitely consider um, an electric pickup truck, because that's exactly how I use my pickup truck, right? It's like, it's for around town driving, it's for trips to the lumber yard on the weekends or the nursery when the weather's nice. So it would almost be ideal for me. And if partner Amy has a vehicle that has a long range and that we can use for road trips, whether it's gasoline or hybrid, then we have a nice mix. And if not an electric, I would definitely consider a hybrid. And I'm very intrigued by the Maverick, actually, and the mileage Ian's getting. And but if I was going to, the last comment is that, having worked now with people who use pickups, including myself, and having worked with a few carpenters who have cargo vans, if I was going to be working as a carpenter anytime for myself, it would be cargo van.
Me too.
No doubt about it. It'd be the first money first investment I
Yeah,
made.
same here.
Yeah. Being able to get in there and get your stuff and keep it weather protected, no matter what the conditions are, is huge, right? And I gotta believe it's more secure.
Yeah, and I mean, a few years ago, I was building some cabinets with. I was working for someone, and we had a big cabinetry job, and we could load really nice cabinet grade plywood into the back of the cargo van easily, keep it upright, keep it protected. Unload it at the shop. We could fit a ton of cabinet boxes in there to deliver them to the job site. Just for that work alone, it kind of, and as you said, keep all the job site tools just in there all the time and always have them with you. Yeah. Never looking for the thing that you forgot to load into the back of the pickup truck that morning.
There's always something, or something comes up that you cannot anticipate.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to some questions. This comes from Lou. Hey, podcast crew. I've got 2 questions for the podcast. Feel free to tackle them separately or together as you see fit. I'm a big fan and so grateful for the work you do. Number 1. I started as a carpenter a few years ago with a small general contractor and recently took a new job at a custom building company as an estimator. I've been listening to the podcast every day in my morning commute, and every time I learn something new, I'm immediately able to apply it. My job is to interpret what I'm looking at, diagnose problems, recommend and estimate a plan of action. I'm often needing to make assumptions about what the details of a house may be without the benefit of exploratory demolition. It seems to me that pro builders are familiar with the changes in building practices over the years and have a mental picture of common assemblies and issues based on the age of the house. Can you direct me to any resources that provide a decade-by-decade overview of common building practices, standard assemblies, and progressive code changes over the years? This may be a longer discussion, best saved for the after show. Thanks for any help or direction in the subject. All right, let's do this one, and then we'll get to Lou's next question. Anyone have thoughts on the first question?
So, of course, I have some thoughts on it. I think he's approaching it from the wrong vantage point. I think what he's missing is that the carpenters that he's seeing that he believes have this mental image, what they actually have is they have experience troubleshooting things that are wrong. So they can see something and immediately react to it because they know what the assembly needs to be or the work that they need to do to repair something in a demo situation. We recently had a kitchen that we fully gutted and it was redone sometime during the recession by people who were probably laid off or doing DIY stuff, and they cut through every single one of the floor joists for the second floor space above, which were only 2x8 to start, and they ran copious amounts of plumbing through all of them, and double and tripled them up with PT 2x8s. Now, we had no idea that existed, so that's going to end up being a change order to the client to repair. But we knew what to do with it when we saw it. It's something that we can fix along with the plumber to plumb things in a way that doesn't require the plumbing to zigzag across the floor system. using the new kitchen layout to accommodate this plumbing. And then it's just simple carpentry fixes from there. So I think as the position that that Lou is in, uh, you have to be okay with a certain amount of unknown and expect that you're going to be able to figure out what to do with it when you see it. And it's less so about cataloging building practices and code practices throughout time and memorial.
That's a good point. Interestingly, I took a completely different question out of this. I thought Lou was looking for typical construction methods based on the era of house: balloon framing, platform framing, timber framing, hybrid framing, and maybe I'm wrong about that. As far as what I'm describing, I don't know that that exists. It seems like a pretty good feature idea for fine home building, so folks could take a best guess on how their plumbing or things might be running in their the way their house is built. Do you guys know of
I think
anything
one
like
of
I
the
describe? Or
issues
go ahead.
I think one of the issues with that, Patrick, is if you have a house that was built in 1920 in San Francisco, Madison, and Bethel, Connecticut, they're all going to be different because of the regional differences in building practices. And when you get into more modern kind of unified building practice stuff post World War II, that's the easy stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the stuff that you open up and any competent DIYer even knows what to do with it when they see it. It's when you look at these houses that were built at the same time in different parts of the country and you open something up and it's totally different, even with the mechanical practices. I think that'd be almost impossible to catalog.
What do you think, Brian?
Well, I agree with everything that that Ian has said, and that regional comment is of course that's very relevant, and for him as a professional, the most helpful thing won't be like what's happening in another what was happening in another part of the country. It'll be what are the common building types in his area,
Even by
and
neighborhood,
where
right?
yeah, even
Yep.
by neighborhood and the houses that he's going to be working on. And largely I think that the reason um, Ian mentioned that experienced carpenters know how to troubleshoot, and that's part of it. And they've worked on, if they're older and they've worked on a lot of houses over time, they've seen more. So I think it'll come with experience. I will say the obvious thing, which is that one good resource for this is Fine Homebuilding magazine. And if you really went back and looked at back issues from from when the magazine started through the 80s and 90s, like not because we've ever done exactly what he's asking for, but because we've covered so much. Read the remodeling stories, read the old house reproduction stories, read the electrical stories where they're updating from knob and tube to something new, so you understand what knob and tube is and where you might find it. And I mean, for me, that's what's given me a largely through this work that I've done. I've always looked back at what we've done, long before my time at the magazine when I'm working on new content. Oh, what have we done on this before? And I'm always amazed by what we've published over time. We've really covered a lot of ground. So that's not just to get him to subscribe to all access
Which
Fine
he
Home
should,
Building
of course.
website, which he should, of course. But I'm being honest. I think it's a good resource. There's others obviously too. Do the same thing with the Journal of Light Construction or other trade publications, and just increase your knowledge. I think whenever you do something full time, your knowledge, if you pay attention, if you care, your knowledge and experience grows fast. So I think he'll be pretty amazed if he keeps doing this work. 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how he'll become one of those people he sees who he thinks have X-ray vision into the home.
Yep. My best piece
Yeah.
of advice for Lou would be to focus less on learning and knowing everything and focus more on what you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis and how you can calmly react to something that was unplanned or unforeseen.
Is a brief generalization to what I was describing on house techniques. Early 20th, late 19th century are going to be balloon framed houses of some variation, in my experience. Anything newer than the 50s is going to be platform framed, and anything before like the late 19th century has a good chance to be timber framed, at least in part. And I think that'll give you a good basis for complexity. Everything you do on anything earlier than the 50s is going to be way harder than any projects you take on that are later. And I would build in some kind of factor to cover your costs for the inevitable weird construction methods that you're going to come across before things got really standardized in the 50s and 60s. What do you think, Ian? Is that a fair
I think that's a really fair
generalization?
generalization, and just blending that with my advice of just continuing to take in your surroundings, and eventually someday you'll be like my former boss Mason Lord, and you can just look at something and go, well, it's in North Kent, Connecticut, and it was built in 1790, so it's probably built like this, and then be right 90 some odd percent of the time.
And look at every place that's been torn apart that you
Yep.
can absolutely go snoop around at projects in your neighborhood or by
Yep,
peers or
Mason's good at that.
yeah, and make
He
friends with
doesn't
those
miss an
folks.
opportunity to go and check out a half gutted building.
Or decrepit
And
barns, I
also,
think, have good
Yep.
clues on how things were built. Yeah.
yeah, and then of course, expect to be surprised, right?
Right.
Because things are remodeled over time. Sometimes things are done weird, and expect to be surprised every once in a while by what you find when you get into the work.
It's fun work. And as Brian suggests, there's always something new to see. This comes from Chris. Chris writes, I'm trying to size a beam for my deck and determine how far apart the footings need to be. I looked at the deck beam tables in the IRC, but the biggest beam they've listed is a triple 2x12. I'd like to use a PT 6x12 hem fir beam in the hope of getting a very long, clear span. Are there any code tables or other resources for sizing large beams? I think this is a great question. Anyone have thoughts on this? I know Mike Gerton wanted to weigh in on this, but he can do that next time he's on the show. Do you guys have thoughts? No.
So what I would do would be go directly to the person you're going to purchase that beam from, and then tell them what you want that beam to do, and they will tell you exactly what their supplier's beam is capable of. And they will probably give you a nice little drawing of it, showing exactly how far apart you can put your posts, and go from there.
Ian,
Yeah, and usually the
dumb
building official
question.
will accept
Are
that.
you talking about an engineered beam like a glue lam or a PSL, both of which can be pressure treated, or are you talking about a sawn lumber beam?
So I read this as a glue lam, which, now that you say that, maybe my reading of it was incorrect, that he's talking about some kind of a sawn lumber beam.
Brian?
I read 6x12 as a big stacked up
Glue lam.
chunk of glue lam PT 2x6s to get 12 inches.
I think Mike was expecting that Chris was referring to on the West Coast. You can get much larger sawn lumber beams because it's a part of the vernacular architecture. And
Well, I will defer to Mike Gerton every time.
well, this makes a lot of sense to have this question on without Mike here, but we're gonna have to muddle
Well, it's
through.
all if that's true, then the local building officials probably are used to working with them, and you could probably just ask the building
Yeah,
official, what they're going to accept, and what and then go from there. Because otherwise, if you have to satisfy a building official, you're going to either need to do what's prescribed in the local codes, bring them some documentation like Ian mentioned from a manufacturer if it's a manufactured product, or have an engineer give you some
Size it.
documentation
Yeah.
that says it's good.
yeah,
So before you, if it is not something that's manufactured, before you pay an engineer, I think it's worth talking to the building official because you might save some money.
for sure.
For sure.
Listen to Brian.
Yeah, that's the best advice. Because it's up to them anyway, right? I think that's your point.
It's up to them anyway. They show up on site and they have the last call.
We recently had a building official tell us that we had to provide engineering to support a prescriptive portal frame install on a garage. And we were like, it's right there in your code. No, you need to provide engineering.
That's so
It's
bogus.
totally out of the blue. It is, but not going anywhere until you provide it.
Yeah, and the code allows for that. If you like,
I
Glenn
know.
Matthewson has taught me this. The
Yep.
language in the code allows for the building official to be the last call. Like that,
Yep.
one word that comes up a lot in the code is approved. So it'll prescribe something. It'll say or other approved thing, and you can look for
Yep.
the IECC reports and maybe that means approved, but really approved means what does your building official approve?
Yep.
That drives me crazy.
Oh yeah.
The rules are there, right? It's like, that's nuts, but I totally get what you're saying.
That was a 3-month delay on a project because
Wow.
of that.
That infuriates me. There's the whole reason that went into the code is to make that easy and cost effective for people. What the heck?
And the reason it became a 3-month delay was it was provide information, wait 3 weeks for them to look at it, get the information back, send it to an engineer, wait 3 weeks for them to look at it, send it back another 3 weeks, and then you get your permit. Back and forth, back and forth. Time goes
Wow.
by.
I'd love to have an after show infuriating things done by code enforcement officials. And if you all have ideas for that after show, I would love to hear them because I think it'd be kind of fun. But that's
I think that's a good call-in show.
This comes from Campbell. Hello, all. Part of my job involves tracking legislation introduced affecting certain industries. While remodelers and home builders are not among my clients, remodeling is my hobby, and I saw this recent bill introduction, and I had great personal interest. It seeks to promote the restoration of historic wood windows. It's tough to handicap its likelihood of success. There are many similar bills pursuing tax credit for certain priorities, and most of the 8,000 some bills introduced each session in the legislature don't become a law. But it is cool to see someone thinking of this and incentivizing this work. I'll put a link to the bill on our podcast page, but generally speaking, it says that when you want to remodel a structure, you have to do what amounts to everything possible to maintain the windows in the structure. What do you guys think about this? Windows are a huge part of our fine home building world. We've had conversations about windows in after shows and by listeners, so a huge thing people deal with in their houses. What do you think about this?
I'll let you start, Brian.
Well, I don't know. I don't know much about the bill, so I can't speak on the incentivizing of it. I think it's always windows are always such a nuanced decision in a house, and I say this on the podcast a lot when windows come up. But the first thing to know about windows and replacing windows is that it's often first and foremost, windows are often not the thing to focus on in an existing house, right? They're windows, whether you are replacing windows or restoring windows, it's expensive, right? It's expensive to replace windows, and it's expensive. The labor is expensive to restore windows well, especially when there's significant work to be done. So first thing to know is most of the time your impact for energy efficiency and comfort and building health and durability is first spent elsewhere, not on your windows. Then when you finally get your windows, when you finally have done everything else, and so now it's whether or not to upgrade your windows. If I think there's certain projects where it makes total sense to restore windows. If you live in an older historic house and maybe in an area where that house is like a big part of the fabric of the local architectural styles, and or just somewhere maybe it's not even that, maybe it's a rural house, but it's you love the house and you love the look of it, then window restoration is a great way to go, and there's great techniques for restoring old windows. We've published lots of them. I think it's satisfying work, only having done very little of it in my time, but it's very satisfying work to complete. It's labor intensive, and there's also ways to improve the performance of those windows, as our recent guest from the White House pointed out.
Heather Clark.
Heather Clark, yeah, on the last episode pointed out, storm windows are a great way to improve the performance of old windows that are maybe beautiful but not energy efficient. So there are ways to make those improvements. And then there's situations where it's an old house, but it's not a historic house, and easier and smarter and better thing to do when it comes to performance is just to replace the windows with new windows. And if it's not a historic house, but it has some traditional character, there are plenty of really nice options for maintaining that character from today's window manufacturers.
I totally agree. And, sometimes, so I think it makes perfect sense to save old windows, matching windows to the house. Sometimes they're too far gone. And, I would hate for someone to have to make custom windows to satisfy, some state rules. But I also hate to see beautiful divided light windows get tossed in the dumpster when it makes no sense, as Brian was pointing out. I think it's a more complex issue.
Yeah, I think we're going to have an article on this from former Fine Homebuilding podcaster Justin Fink in the near future, because Justin's remodeling business that he started when he had this business while he was working
for years,
actually. But Justin's remodeling business in the past few years has turned into largely a window restoration company. He wanted to specialize his remodeling business on old homes, and he just quickly found this niche, restoring windows. But what he finds is that even on a project where he may be going into a historic home and that needs 12 windows restored, there may be one or two that are, like you mentioned, Patrick, that are beyond the point of restoration, and now he has to build matching windows. And so I think we're going to do an article with him on replicating historic windows for those situations. He largely thinks it makes more sense to do the restoration when possible. But if there's two windows that are too far gone, it's often, he tells his clients, these two I need to rebuild. And that's the route he takes.
I think it's a perfect project for folks who are fans of this show and Fine Homebuilding's content generally. It's all labor. The costs are very low in material, right?
Yeah. And, a homeowner, a do-it-yourselfer, if you get armed with the information and take the time to build a steam box, which is, not a big deal. And, it could be it's a project that can be, I think it's rewarding. I think it's fun work, but you can also do a couple of windows at a time.
Yeah.
So you can take a couple windows out, put some temporary, board those holes up temporarily, work on them, put them back in, move on to a few more, so it's something that you can do like incrementally like that and work your way around your house.
Ian, have you ever had the occasion to restore wood sash?
I have, and interestingly enough, the assemblywoman who proposed this bill was my assemblywoman when I lived in New York State, and I worked on many of the homes that would benefit from this legislation. I would also point out that all of those homes were owned by incredibly high net wealth individuals. Mm-hmm. So
they're fine. I mean, they can afford to restore windows, right?
Yeah, it's a cool bill, but and I did read the bill because I have that kind of time. It caps it at $200,000 per year of tax credit, and you have to keep in mind, as we all know from the solar and EV stuff, tax credits require income to mm-hmm. credit your taxes against. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of people craftspeople who will benefit from more window work being undertaken, but I don't think this is really for your regular homeowner of a older home in the upper tri-state area, not the New York City tri-state area, but more of the old manor houses and estate homes.
Well, if you have thoughts on historic windows, or any other subject, I hope you write into the Fine Homebuilding podcast email box and tell us your thoughts. We really enjoy hearing from you. Well, guys, I look forward to talking about the after show and Ian's tips for construction budgets. This was motivated by a PowerPoint presentation you did to your colleagues, Ian, and it was a bunch of useful information in there, so I look forward to sharing that with you all. And I want to thank you very much for being an all-access member. You help us do the important work of Fine Homebuilding. Great talking to you guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Ian, Brian, and Andres for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Thanks very much for listening.